Hi there folks, welcome to ESST1006 Human Impacts on the Environment, tutorial number 2. So in this tutorial we are going to be continuing our endeavor to try and get you to adopt some university level ways of doing things, and in particular reading and critiquing the references and the articles and the reading material that you will be given, because you are reading for a degree, so doing a lot of reading is really what we are supposed to be doing here and evaluating that reading. So the objectives of this tutorial is to get you to think about critical thinking. What is critical thinking? You've probably heard of critical thinking already. It's one of those things which politicians and teachers love to talk about, critical thinking. But what is it? What do we mean by critical thinking, and why is it so desirable? We'll take a look at how we can engage in critical thinking in terms of understanding and analyzing the reading that we do and all the references around us. Now, this is an important skill, not just in a degree, but just in your life in general, particularly in the internet age where we're being bombarded by loads of information from all different directions all the time. And quite often we're at a loss to decide whether we should take it seriously or not, because sometimes a lot hinges on whether we can weed out what the things that we should be acting upon and the things which we can quite safely ignore, or even we can understand that it is irrelevant or simply untrue. So what we want to do is try and give you an introduction into the examination of active and analytical reading of different things from different places, and eventually for you to critically evaluate a reading. So, what do you think critical thinking is? Here's one definition. Critical thinking is that mode of thinking about any subject, content, or problem in which a thinker improves the quality of his or her thinking by skillfully taking charge of structures inherent in thinking and imposing intellectual standards upon them. That's a fairly complicated mouthful. To me, really, critical thinking is really just trying to analyze the information that you're given and put it into a different context and use that information to make decisions on what you are going to believe and what your actions are going to be in the future. So in particular, we want to talk about critical thinking in this tutorial in relation to what you read. Okay? So what we want you to do is to try and develop a technique in reading which is grounded in knowledge and which includes the ability to form an opinion for yourself based on what you read, and that means being able to recognize that in what you read there may be some either misinformation or half-truths, all intended to mislead what the reader is supposed to get out of the article. And with your critical reading, you should be able to find an impartial solution for any sort of matters which come up with your reading. You must be able to ignore or control biases which may be inherent in any particular reading. So, and in particular, recognize when you are, or the piece is straying into some sort of bias. Sometimes that can be very difficult, particularly when the reading echoes your own biases, and that quite often leads into what is known as an echo chamber and can lead people into biasing their search for knowledge to things which they are going to agree with and things which are able to reinforce what their biases are already. Now, that's not a good way to be, particularly if you're trying to learn, because when you are trying to learn, you're trying to see both sides of any sort of argument and seeing the merits in all sorts of arguments, because there are quite often merits in both sides of a story. So you need to be able to control that bias that you have and be able to be impartial and say, well, actually, the other side does have a point because of this, this, and this. And so when you are evaluating a reading, you should say, they make the case that this is the situation. And I think that is probably true because of, however, if you look at it in a different way, then it may not be correct. And that is called analyzing the reading. And you must know how to identify and question assumptions which are made in your reading, because a lot of the time the reading that you are reading does make assumptions. So it asserts facts which you can see are not supported by any other examples or anything. And you must try and resist that. So with the ability to identify and question assumptions in your reading comes the ability to resist that the authority that you're reading has captured the whole truth. So you must be able to read something and say, yes, that is part of the story, but I feel like there is more to the story than that. So some of the habits that you need to develop when you are trying to critically evaluate a reading is impartial inquiry. Don't take any sort of one-sided opinions at face value. So even if you're reading a piece which broadly agrees with what you think, you must always try and see the opposite side of it as well. And try and understand why these other people have these opposite opinions. Who knows why? They may have a basis in fact. You need to weigh up the evidence. You need to be able to examine what is written and see whether it's backed up with facts and grounded in truths which allow you to make a decision on whether what you're reading is correct or not. You must try and attempt to see things truly. Okay? So rather than just collecting readings which reinforce your biases already, you must try and get some things on the other side of the coin. Just like when you're reading a review on Amazon, you don't just look at all the good reviews, you must look at some of the bad reviews as well to be truly informed. Otherwise you'll just buy the item irrespective of whether it is bad or not. Try and live within your own center. Try and free yourself from the reading's directions. So for instance, if the reading has a certain bias, try not to be trapped by that bias and retain some sort of independence. Try and make sure that you can see both sides and analyze basically on the strength of the evidence which is presented and what you know already, whether or not the reading is true or not, or whether it should inform your actions or your knowledge or not. There are a few questions that you can ask when you read something, and they are arranged here. So you've got things like clarity. Is the reading clear? Can it elaborate further? Can it give me examples? Can it illustrate what it means? So look at your reading, and maybe paragraph by paragraph, and you say, is this paragraph clear? Can it elaborate further, etc.? Accuracy. Is there any way you can check on what is asserted in a particular piece? How can you check it out? How can you find out whether it is true or not? Precision. Could the paragraph be more specific? Could it give more details? And could it be more exact? Relevance. Does a paragraph or does a piece, is it relevant to what you want to find out? Is it relevant to the questions that you are asking? Okay, quite often you are asking one particular question, you find a reading, you read it, and you realize that it isn't really applying to your particular question. Or in a reading that you're reading, it's asking a particular question or posing a particular question, or there is a purpose for the particular essay, but the example that it gives is not relevant to the actual problem. Okay? Depth. What does the reading go into sufficient depth? Does it explore the complexity? Does it try and understand some of the options or alternatives for the different ways of viewing a particular problem or question? Breadth. Do you look at things all from the same perspective? Or could you look at it from another point of view? So for instance, if we're looking at poverty, can we look at poverty from a rich person's point of view? Does it always have to be from the poor person's point of view? Okay? You need to take a look at the different ways you can look at a problem. Logic. Does it all make sense? Is there some sort of flow? Is the argument sound? Or does it jump around all over the place? Does one paragraph fit in with the next paragraph? Does the first paragraph fit in with the last paragraph? Or does it contradict? Okay, there needs to be some sort of logic in the piece that you're reading. It doesn't contradict itself continuously. Significance. Is the reading the most important issue that you need to consider? Does the reading address the central core of the question or the problem that it is trying to answer or you are trying to answer? Okay, that feeds back into relevance, I guess. Fairness. Do you or does the article have any vested interest in sympathetically representing one viewpoint over the next? You need to analyze your reading to see whether it has got any bias and whether that bias leads to a lack of fairness in its addressing the problem or the situation. Sometimes you can't assess whether the author of the article or the reading is being fair or not until you understand the background of the author or the organization which publishes the article. All right, so I would like you to take a look at the National Geographic video. You can pause this video and watch the National Geographic video. It's all about ecological collapse caused by humans on Easter Island. And it's based on a lecture by two archaeologists who went to Easter Island and investigated archaeological evidence, and they were testing the theory put together by a prominent science writer called Jared Diamond. He's an ecologist, and he has written a series of popular science fact books, popular science books about humans and their place in the ecology around the world. And this book that he wrote, I think it was Collapse and Why Human Civilizations Fail. And one of the examples he used was Rapa Nui, which is Easter Island. And the paradigm which he painted was that humans overuse their own resources on Easter Island, which is a small island in the southeastern Pacific. And because of their overuse of the resources on Easter Island, it led to their own decline and demise. These archaeologists went to Easter Island to either confirm or refute this hypothesis. So take a look at the video and see what you think. I will visit you on the next slide. All right, so hopefully you've taken a look at the video, and we want to go through it and give it some sort of critical analysis. Okay, so first of all, what are the authors? And we're talking about the archaeologist giving the lecture. What were their basic assumptions? And it seems like their basic assumptions were that you can tell what the people on Easter Island were doing based on the archaeological evidence. And their basic assumptions were that they would be able to work out what the human structure was like, what the natural resources which they used were like, based on archaeological evidence. What were the key concepts and ideas that they were presenting? Well, the key concepts they were presenting were that humans colonized Easter Island, and they used the natural resources on Easter Island to create a society which, far from being a society which was out of sync with the natural resources, in other words, they couldn't sustain themselves, they were using the natural resources unsustainably, that they in fact formed a society which was sustainable and was very harmonious with the resources which they have. And the reasons and justifications for this view was the archaeological evidence pointed to it. Or more specifically, the archaeological evidence did not show any reason that there was a breakdown in civilization by the native Polynesian people of Easter Island, and that there was no archaeological evidence for a breakdown in civilization due to overuse of natural resources. Okay, and they used supporting archaeological evidence as their supporting examples, and they seem pretty compelling to me. They certainly did do some interpretation on the evidence, but I think that the interpretations which they gave were on the whole fairly reasonable, and they cited supporting examples from other Polynesian islands like Hawaii. So for instance, to explain the removal and the loss of all the palm trees on Easter Island, they gave the example of a similar loss of palm trees which came about because of rats on Hawaii, and they cited the fact that early in the archaeological evidence of humans on Easter Island, they found large amounts of rat bones in the layers where the humans first arrived. And that seemed to be a fairly reasonable assumption then. Can they relate what they found to parallel experiences of their own? That is basically relating their work to other parts of the world as well. I'm not too sure that they did that. And then finally, what are the implications and consequences of their views? Well, the implications and consequences is that it is not inevitable that humans are going to trash their natural resources. There are cases where humans are able to create a society without going through a phase of chaos where they can use their natural resources sustainably and be able to create a society which will last and be in harmony with its natural resource use. Okay, so that's my critical analysis of their lecture. I think that some of their opinions were there were opinions. There was not 100% of evidence, but there certainly wasn't any evidence, as I could see, against what they said. Now, I'm just going based on their lecture, and if I were now to read other articles which looked at the other side of the situation, and they said, no, in fact, this evidence seems to show that there may have been chaos and so on going on. Okay? But generally, I think they did do a pretty good job of examining the evidence for support of a chaotic breakdown, and I think their ideas that there wasn't a chaotic breakdown was fairly reasonable. All right. So what I would like you to do as part of your assessment for this tutorial is to take a look at an article, and this is known as a op-ed piece or an opinion editorial piece from the New York Times, basically looking at human population. I want you to take a read of it and critically review it and answer some of the questions which I will post up on my learning as assessment for this program. So I want you to be able to try and understand the sorts of things that you will do for a critical review of this piece, and I want you to be able to answer the questions that I pose there. And hopefully, if you can answer the questions, you do have a good idea of critical analysis. All right, so I want you to go through the article paragraph by paragraph, okay? Follow these mechanisms that are on the slide here. Read the paragraph through once, summarize the paragraph in your own words, maybe a sentence or so, enter into a dialogue with the author and identify questions you would like to ask the author based on how your summary goes. Okay? So that you can ask the author why. Why do you think that way? Do you have evidence for what you are saying? And so on. All right? So here's the link to the exercise. You can get it off the PowerPoint, which is separate to this video. I want you to take a look at these different resources which are there on My Learning, and you can download and take a look at them and read them before you do your critical analysis of the article. Once you've finished your critical analysis, I then want you to take a look at the questions. All right? But please do the critical analysis first before you move on to the questions, because I'm going to pitch the questions so that you will not be able to do the questions until you had done the critical analysis, or at least have a very good idea of what the critical analysis is. Okay? So I look forward to seeing what you come up with. All right. Thank you very much. Bye now.